acceptance of my own disability, did you say? I like percentages, but I'd like to think I'm halfway there. I mean, I've gone a little bit backward, strangely. The first few years I was great, I was doing all sorts of stuff, and yeah, it was amazing. And then I think since the pandemic, or slightly before that, I've started to just withdraw a little bit. I'm not sure the reason. I know this is getting quite deep, and I don't want it ever to come across as pitiful, but it's just my reality today.
So Paul, welcome to Disabled and Proud. How are you today?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm okay, thanks. Yeah, just getting used to the cold weather again for January, but I'm doing all right.
Do you know what? Cold weather is actually the worst.
Yeah.
This weather feels more Christmassy than Christmas did. That's how I like to explain it. I feel like these minus degrees, this is when I want to be drinking mulled wine. This is when I want to be going to a Christmas market, not necessarily in January.
Yeah, it feels like it's a little bit later now, doesn't it? I mean, like say on Christmas Day, you usually, it's Christmas Day, it's freezing outside or the snow, something like that. I remember that from back in the day, but I'm getting a bit old now though, so.
No, I feel very similar. I feel like this weather is more Christmassy than Christmas is. Christmas and Easter have kind of switched. Easter used to be when it was like coming into spring and really lovely, and now it's more like freezing cold weather in Easter rather than at Christmas. So global warming, who knew that it was a thing?
Yeah, that's it. I think today was definitely the coldest as well.
Yeah, it was like I woke up this morning and it was like -8, which is absolutely feral. Like, that's disgusting.
Jesus, that is cold. I think it was about 5 or 6 here, but yeah, that is going some.
So the first question that I like to ask every single guest on this podcast is, how do you refer to your disability?
How do I refer to it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't really. The truth is, I kind of, well, I say I'm an arm amputee, but I don't really, the truth be known, I don't actually, going straight into it, I don't really particularly accept the loss of my arm. So I find that I always cover it up. It's always covered up, even if I'm wearing a t-shirt. I put sort of tailored socks on it and things like that. So it's kind of a bit of a denial from where I come from, which is probably a bit odd for you to hear, because a lot of people, or most people, in fact, they kind of accept it and get on with it. But I'm very different in that sense. So how do I refer to it? Really, I try not to. I try to kind of not really let it play a part in my life and just, carry on as normal. Really, pre being injured, if I can. Obviously, it's very different now, but that's my plan. Doesn't really answer your question, does it? But
actually it does as well, because everybody relates to their disability incredibly individually, because disability is individual. Two people could have the exact same diagnosis on a piece of paper, and how that disability is going to affect them is going to be completely different, and it's going to be completely based on the individual. So actually it kind of does answer that question as well, because you're saying like you do cover up your disability, and actually it's something that you try not to refer to or bring attention to, because it's not something that you particularly want to have like these big deep conversations about, which is absolutely fine. And it's a really interesting topic, isn't it, disability? Because I think a lot of disabled people feel like they need to disclose absolutely everything about their disability when they're asked. And there's also a lot of people like yourself who don't need to have those conversations, don't want to have those conversations, and actually it's incredibly private, and it's mainly for you.
It is. I mean, I know a lot of people in the military. Obviously, that's my background, and they've lost limbs, and they just sort of own it, really, for want of a better way of putting it. They just, they're just happy with their new self, whereas I'm very different. And I know nowadays there's a lot of people that, without saying the wrong thing, probably strive for attention a little bit, or they deserve attention because they're disabled. Again, I've got to be careful what I say. But for me, I don't really want it for that reason. I want opportunity, and if opportunity comes my way because I happen to be disabled, arm amputee, then brilliant. But I don't really want it because of that. And I'm not sure whether there's people. I don't know. I'll leave it there.
But this is actually such an interesting conversation because, like you said, some people, rightly or wrongly, will use their disability to their advantage. I mean, it's like, you know, super layman's terms, that's what we're talking about here, is people gaining clout because of their disability. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't happen in other areas of life as well. There are plenty of people out there who use what they have and what they've got to their advantage. And I think when disability comes into play, I think, do we feel awkward about it because for so long disability was very much hidden and in the sidelines, and it's not necessarily something that we really always spoke about. Is that maybe one of the reasons why it feels so awkward to talk about it? I don't know. It's a really interesting area to have this conversation in.
It is. I don't know. It's a tough one to answer, really. I think a bit like everything. I think the shift sometimes goes a little bit. The pendulum swings a little bit too much, maybe, perhaps. And again, I understand people who are disabled, they might have been kept in the dark for many years, and I do appreciate that. I mean, I'm disabled, so I'm talking as if I'm not, but I get they've probably being put in the dark. So when they get the opportunity now that they're perhaps more accepted in society, then they're going to shout from the rooftops. But I do agree that I do think there are more people out there that are coming out of the woodwork and maybe trying to gain attention from it. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's a really tough one to answer that. But I personally, and this is probably because I wasn't born with half an arm. I don't really want to gain attention because of my arm. But if it's an opportunity, then obviously I'm going to take it like everyone else. We're all trying to survive and do our best. But I don't want to specifically say, look, here's my arm, I've got half an arm and I deserve and demand attention. And also, one thing I'll just say, Brooke, quickly, and this is really controversial, but I'll throw it in there. I think sometimes people believe that the acceptance of disability is so much better now than it ever was. Actually, it probably is, but I think there is also an element, again, this is really controversial, I think there's also an element of people believe they should say that they accept disability, and so that's what they do. It's not necessarily they specifically want disability to come to the forefront. I think sometimes it's like when people say I'm non-judgmental. I think people are clever now. They want others to hear that they say they're non-judgmental, but we're all judgmental. So I think sometimes, I mean, you can tell me if you think that's a little bit out of line or whatever, but I think sometimes people, not everyone, there are some amazing people out there, millions of amazing people, but I think there are people out there that actually, they might say something differently to what they're actually thinking.
That is interesting because...
Quite negative, that, isn't it?
Well, actually, yeah, it is. It is really. And it's interesting that is your viewpoint on it. Because I think having a background in disability, so like my background is always going to be disability, like it's never going to not be. It's very much my lived experience. It's the only experience that I do have. From being a disabled child to then moving into disabled adult, I would say that disability has 100% been more accepted as I have got older. And that is due to a lot of different reasons. Representation in the media is a massive part to play. Social media, huge factor in that because it's become seen as more normal. So it's really interesting that you say that because you're someone who acquired your disability. So that means that actually, like, your knowledge of disability is not going to be like mine because the time difference is going to be a lot shorter. So this was very much like my lived experience from birth, where it's not been your lived experience from birth. So this has been something that you have you've acquired, and it's something that's kind of bestowed upon you. So actually, your view of disability pre-becoming disabled is going to be very, very different to what it is now that you are disabled. And I was wondering, what's that transition been like for you? Because obviously, like you said, like you don't have the most positive experience with your disability. So did disability feature in your life beforehand?
Not really. No, I didn't really. I wasn't ever involved in anything to do with disability. And again, I take what you say. You've lived it, so you know. And I know there have been. I'm not going back on what I'm saying. I'm just saying I know there have been many changes of acceptance in society, like you say, the media and stuff. All my point was, I just feel sometimes it goes too far, and there are people that might say, yeah, disabled is great, but actually might not quite mean it as if it's coming across. That's my only point, really. I feel like sometimes the pendulum swings a bit too far, and you've got to be careful on that. But I was never. I mean, I've been disabled for 12 years now, 13 years this year, so quite an amount of time. But I never really had any involvement in disability before that. I'd like to think that I was never judgmental before that. I mean, but I was in a different environment. I was in a military environment all the time, so it's very different. But how have I since I was injured? I don't know. I mean, you've said that you've seen things improve dramatically, and I'm sure you've probably seen things improve dramatically over 12, 13 years. I'm not so sure I have, and again, it might just be my lens on life or my approach or my current situation, but I feel when I was first injured, I was having ample opportunity to whether that be background TV work or public speaking, and I feel like when I was going to huge charity events or huge events, and it doesn't have to be charity events, in the golfing industry that I was getting involved in, really high profile events, I feel like people's approach to disability then was perhaps a little bit better than it was today. I don't know why. I don't know if that's the COVID thing that's changed people's way. I don't know. I'm just stabbing in the dark there, but I don't know. My take on it is I feel like there's a bit more judgment over the last 2 or 3 years with me more than it was previously. So I'm not sure why I'm picking up on that, but obviously you're the complete opposite. I think even during COVID, have you seen a great transition that's positive for disability?
I think COVID gave a lot of people a lot of realization that things that disabled people have been asking for so long in terms of access needs and accessible requirements suddenly got handed to everybody left, right and centre, like overnight, when disabled people have been asking for these things for years and years and years, and the world realized that we could all work from home if we had to, and you know, again, something disabled people have been asking for years, and I think COVID actually really brought about a really big solidarity within the disabled community, because again, everybody realized that literally at a drop of a hat, your whole life can change immediately. And also, you know, when we first think about COVID, we didn't know what the world was going to look like 3, 4, 5 years after. And now we're still very much like in it. COVID still very much exists. But, you know, we had that moment of time where everybody suddenly realized that at any point in time you could become disabled. And it wasn't just, you know, like, oh, you're the way that this happens isn't just, like you say, like military, or it isn't just that you were really unwell. It could be anything. And we all kind of faced that together, and it was very unifying. So I think over the past couple of years, it's become a lot more accepting. But as we're moving back towards more like less working from home and less hybrid type of working. And I'm talking more about working because that's where we really, really saw it more so than socially. I think people understood socially quite quickly that actually, you know, these rules and measures were put in place for whatever reason. But now we're moving back into that, going back into the office, going back into work a bit more often, being around people a lot more often. We're kind of seeing that the appreciation that was given to the disabled community is dwindling. I will admit that it is dwindling, but I think representation wise, I think we have got a lot better. So like it is swings and roundabouts, and nothing is ever going to be at 100%. That's, you know, that's really futile to think that. But I do think in the last couple of years, things have got better in terms of representation. But then when we think about how the UK no longer has a disability minister, it hasn't got better as well. So like that, like I said, there are swings and roundabouts to every single topic surrounding disability, and what's right for one person is not going to be right for another person. And that's something I think we really need to accept, is that disability is just an umbrella term for something that's so vast and such a myriad of different things.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting in how you put it. And as I say, it's my lens, isn't it? It's my lens. Again, viewers, listeners might be like, "Oh my God, he's so negative. That's awful." But it's just how I see things. But I think you're right. It's definitely opportunities definitely increased. But now people are starting to go back to work and things like that. Maybe it's just leveling out a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. So you said that you've been disabled now for 12 years. And
Yeah.
what was the experience of acquiring your disability like? And I'm not talking about like, you know, traumatic events. I'm talking, what was the experience like of suddenly realizing that your life was different to what it was beforehand?
I mean, for me, it was huge because, well, it is huge for everyone. I'm not, but I was on a pedestal really. I was in a career and I was flying in that career. So I was doing amazingly well amongst my peer group, and I was going to the top of my rank structure, and yeah, I was just competing in sport. Sport played a big part in my life. Boxing. I was also kind of a keen DJ back then. I was running my own charity events, bringing on some big DJs, some world famous DJs. And then it sort of happened in a flash, literally. So it was tough. I mean, those opportunities are still there, and I've been very fortunate. I've been able to get involved in some sport again, and I've done a bit of DJing and things like that. But I don't know. It's hard to say that. I think you'll never be the same person again. I think I can't relate to your experience, and you know, it's very different for you. You've had to grow up, and I'm sure there's some extremely tough times growing up. But I can only say for me, it's different because I don't feel the same person. I'm not sure I ever will. So I've tried to mold myself into a new individual. But yeah, it's tough. It's tough. I as I say at the beginning of the call, I don't really. This is my own issue, but I don't really accept my arm. Because I don't want any attention to it, and I say I cover it up and stuff like that. I never leave it bare. So there's, I don't know. It sounds quite shallow, doesn't it? Pretty awful, but yeah, it's had a profound impact, and clearly there's still areas of acceptance that I have to work on. But I got on with it. You know, I'm resilient. We're all resilient, and I got on with it. I learned a lot of skills in the military and mental strength and. Physically, I was strong, so I dealt with it and I moved forward, and I still do. I still do my best, but yeah, it's a very, very tough pill to swallow for sure.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I was literally just having this conversation with someone else that acquiring your disability and being born disabled are two incredibly different experiences because you have known life without disability. You know, you've had a big chunk of your life that didn't really involve too much disability, like whether that was, you know, by choice or not, it just wasn't really present. And then all of a sudden life is very, very different, and you've got to almost relearn how to do like a whole lot of stuff. I can imagine you probably had endless amount of hours of physio. You probably had doctors telling you this is what you can do, this is what you can't do, and then realizing also that doctors actually have not a fucking notion what people can and can't do when it comes to disability. And that experience itself must have been really quite baffling.
Yeah, it's so hard because you feel. I mean, I was 33 as well, so I'd lived a good amount of life before losing my arm. And people are in a much worse place than they've got much worse injuries than me. You can't compare how they are in life. But yeah, it's tough because it's hard for anyone to relate. Really, I mean, you could have counselling sessions, as you say. You could speak to the doctor, but I had so many battles through COVID with the doctors because they just didn't really understand where I was coming from. You know, the pain I was experiencing in my arm, phantom pain. You know, I get quite a lot of phantom pain. You see. So yeah, adapting. I remember when I first lost my arm, I used to go to close the doors and miss them, you know, because you still realise, you still feel your hands, you know, a bit further down, or well, I've not got a hand, but you still feel like you've got your limb. So initially, it was a nightmare, and you then learn to tie your shoelaces and getting dressed and all the things that the thing is, for me, all the things that were so easy and automatic before, you don't even think about unconsciously. Now you have to think about them. But the thing is, for me, there's a bit of frustration in me still, which I shouldn't really after 12 years. So when I'm doing my shoelaces and maybe I get it wrong and I have to start again, or I'm rushing around, I need to get out of the house and I'm getting dressed. For me, I get a bit frustrated because I feel I can relate back to, and you shouldn't live in the past, but I feel like I can relate back to how it was before. So I'm like, oh, for fuck. You know, I really wanted to. I was really great at golf, and I'm quite good now. But I was really good before, and you know, I used to tie my shoelaces in 10 seconds. Now I'm taking 50 seconds or a minute or whatever. And I used to train like this. I used to do, you know, dumbbells and chest press, and so really my focus is not in the right place, because you can't change something as significant as losing a limb. And I don't spend my everyday feeling like that, but there are fleeting times when I get quite frustrated because, you know, I knew what it was like, you know, washing pots or undoing a jar or whatever. I get quite frustrated because I know the before and I know the now. But, you know, ultimately you've got to get on with it. That's life, and lucky to be alive and all the rest of it. But as I say, some fleeting frustrations and bitterness come in every now and then.
And I do think that is only natural, because acquiring a disability, like as I've said, and I'll probably say multiple different times, it is very different to being born disabled. You don't, like, for me, I don't have to think about how I do certain things. It's just natural. It comes naturally to me. It would be the equivalent of me suddenly waking up and having a right hand. I would freak out. Like, I would not know what to do. You know, suddenly, as you said, like tying my shoelaces would be completely different. Opening jars would be a completely different experience. Opening a packet of crisps, completely different experience. So I think I can completely empathize with what you're saying. It is a completely different way of life because you've had something and it's being taken away from you. And it's never easy to go through that. But equally, again, as you said, like, you're lucky to be alive. And that in itself is something that's incredible, because there are people who don't necessarily get that fortune. And so, again, very much swings and roundabouts. Yes, it's not ideal that things have changed, and acceptance is very much a journey. Everybody in their journey is in complete different places, and there's no point in comparing someone who's 10 years down the line to someone who is, 5 years down the line. They're going to be in very, very different places, but it doesn't mean that you can't oscillate between where you are and where you were. It's a very difficult process. And not that I don't envy that, because I think it would be difficult regardless, and everybody goes through their own stuff. But I think what's so interesting for me is when you have to think about things that you would have done before, like you said, tying shoelaces. The idea that you then have to really think about how you now do that is something that I find really interesting, because I obviously don't have to think about that kind of thing. And I think that is where I can completely understand why there's frustration there, because it's something you've been doing since you were like, 2 years old. I don't know if 2-year-olds can tie their laces, maybe they can. But then it completely changes. And as an adult, and just because of how our brains are wired up and neural pathways, of course it's going to not be easy. It's going to be difficult because you're trying to create a completely new pathway that's been there for years and years and years.
And don't get me wrong, you adapt. I adapt now, but as you say, going back to if I was to wake up with my left arm again, I'd be like, because I'm sure I'd go back into things. But you do adapt. You learn to, everything I do now, I don't really consider this arm, even though I do use it a little bit to maybe push against something or whatever it may be. But then again, you've had it from childhood, so you've had to go through the difficulties of that. But don't get me wrong, I'm very lucky. I've had so much opportunity since, and as I say, I'm lucky to be alive. I'm well supported in different ways. So it's not that. It's just the frustration sometimes, because I don't know. You kind of look back, don't you? I'm always kind of saying, this was Paul in the army, a staff sergeant, flying high. This is Paul now. And some people just transition and go, oh, this is Paul now. Right, let's go forward. Always, 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 always. And I'll put my hand up and say, I don't do that as much as I should, really. I do sometimes reflect back and get frustrated, but that's my own issue.
Yeah. So interestingly, I always like to talk about career. So your career obviously played a massive part in your disability. It's like it's occupational hazard when it comes to the military. But what was your career choices like before your disability, and then after your disability? How did your disability change your career path and the path that you then went on?
How did it change it afterwards? So
Yeah.
I joined very so I joined. Okay, I think I understand what you're asking. So I joined very early. I joined when I was 17. So I spent all of my adult life in the military. So I followed my older brother. He joined earlier, a few years earlier. Sorry, just say again, Brooke. What you asking there? Because I'm kind of confused.
So it's about your career. So like your career before you became disabled, like you didn't think about, obviously you didn't think about disability. It wasn't something that you had to think about. But after becoming disabled, how did that impact your career choices and the career path that you were on?
Yeah. So 16 years in the army, served on operations all over. Obviously, it comes with the territory that you might get injured, but you don't think you'll ever get injured because you'd never have a military if there was people getting injured left, right, and centre. So you kind of take that risk, but there's always a chance, and you sign the dotted line. So I was injured, 33. Has it impacted it? I mean, it's a really tough one to answer because I don't know what I was going to be doing after I joined, because I never considered disability whilst I was serving. That's just, I'll be honest, it just never came into my mind. So I was a personal trainer, or PTI, physical training instructor, in the military. So when I first got injured and I recovered after because I was, my internals were damaged and my whole of my left side was very badly damaged. I probably had about 20 plus operations and stuff. But when I recovered at the recovery centre, I think I wanted to get back into sport, and I trained to become a personal trainer. It didn't really impact me, really. To be honest, I've not really felt that it impacted me. I was able to. I didn't have a lot of clients, but I set up my gym at my home, and I was able to take clients. And the course that I took for 6 weeks, which was an intensive course, there was nothing really that impacted me. I just had to make adaptations for exercises and things like that, but it didn't really impact me, other than I would have to show a client something with an exercise with one arm instead of two. So I'd need to be a bit more creative and things like that, imaginative. But essentially, I was able to carry on and work as normal. And then I did a bit of TV work as well, background TV stuff, extras work, little bit of acting, but very, very little. So I was in a HBO production, a couple of scenes. But I don't think really that it impacted me. I never really gave it much thought. Even though I was saying I live in the past, I just felt, well, this is me. I want to get on. I'm able to speak, so I did some public speaking. I'm able to do background TV work, and I can do personal training. So really, I didn't feel that it was impactful, apart from ongoing pain that I was experiencing, and I still do. It didn't really impact me.
Yeah. Just out of pure curiosity, when you are public speaking, what are the topics that you talk about?
I've not done it for a long time. The COVID kind of put a halt to it, really, and I've not really found myself getting out there as much as I would like, for sure. So I've kind of been fairly isolated over the last 4 years. But when I used to talk, essentially I was just telling my story. So I was just telling my life story of growing up in the Midlands, joining the army, being on top of the world, being around my mates, camaraderie, banter, leadership, all this great stuff that I was doing. And then all of a sudden, in the blink of an eye, I was injured in the bomb blast. And just how it changed, and how recovery was so tough, and I'd lie in the hospital, and I'd touch on that, but then I'd go on to say that, I was very lucky to be introduced to golf again, which was a childhood sport that I used to love. And I then got to compete against the Americans, and I did the acting and talking. So it's really just telling my story and hopefully showing some form of resilience. That was the plan behind it. There was never any overriding message to the audience in front of me. It was more a fact of tell your story, and hopefully one or two in the audience might find that inspiring, and so it's touching mostly on resilience.
Interesting. Super interesting, actually. I like to think that if we can look back at hard times and notice a positive trait about ourselves, then actually we've learned something. And I was wondering, if you look back upon reflection, is there a particular positive trait that you really admire in yourself?
You shouldn't need time to think about this, should you? Clearly, I do, because there's so many. Not really. No, I think the guys in the army, in the regiment and stuff, they'd see me as a very what's the word? Oh God, sorry, the word. That's quite humble, really, and grounded. Because I was doing really well, and in the military, you do kind of build up a bit of an ego, rightly or wrongly. You do, because you're getting put on a pedestal if you're doing well, and I was doing really well, but I never really allowed that to go to my head. So I suppose I was humble and resilience. You know, we've all got a background. I've got a childhood which, you know, wasn't plain sailing by any stretch of the imagination, but I was able to again come through it and still compete in sport and do really well. As a kid, you know, I used to play for like Leicester Boys and stuff like that, and then excel in the military. So I think resilience is probably the one that stands out.
I think resilience is a really common trait for quite a lot of disabled people, because being disabled, you know, society doesn't necessarily want you to succeed. Like, and that's not me being defeatist. That's me just being very realistic. When we think about people in the workplace, or we think about general life, disability isn't always thought about, rightly or wrongly. And so a lot of disabled people are very, very resilient, because quite often doors are closed in your face repeatedly. And if you're a disabled child, they are closed in your face at a very young age. And the choices are either to get over it in the nicest way possible, or sink. And you don't really get a choice between the two. So I always love it when disabled people say they're resilient, because they are the exact epitome of what resilience is. And there's no way that you can argue with me that we're not.
No, definitely not. I mean, especially it's innate within you. But I have to say, especially through people who've been disabled from birth or a very young age, let's say, that even more so, because as you say, I don't know what it's like. I really don't know what it's like to. I mean, I think there was a couple of disabled kids in my class and things like that, and that it was all fine. But you've experienced all the rejection. It sounds like you've experienced all the rejection throughout your life. Not now, obviously, you're doing really well and everything, but it sounds like you have experienced that, and I don't know what that's like, because I never did. So yeah, I think that goes without saying that when you're disabled, you're extremely resilient, especially if you're born with it. But you know, for me, I suppose I was resilient through my childhood, and the fact that going in the army, you've got to be resilient. You know, you've got to, because there's a lot of difficult times.
Yeah. Have you, and I wonder about this question, I like to ask this question for everybody, but I really wonder what your answer is going to be. And I like to think about the weird questions that we get as disabled people. Now, you might not get any, but I know a lot of people do. And I was wondering, are there a particular set of questions or like weird comments that you get surrounding your disability?
Not really. I mean, no, not really. There's nothing really that I get. I mean, I've been on a few reunions, and some of the guys, you know, there's banter that kicks in, and I can't really remember, you know, it's harmless and things like comments like that come out. But there's nothing specifically physically about my arm that I mean, is there anything that you can touch on?
Loads.
It might.
I think
it's stuff that you can say on this podcast.
Oh yeah. Like I'm very, very open on this. it's very, very interesting that as a man, you say that you don't really get any weird questions, because it tends to quite often be that those who are male or male presenting or masked don't really get many bizarre questions surrounding their disability. And the most that guys tend to get, and this is generally if they're either in a wheelchair or use walking sticks, tends to be around whether or not they can or cannot have sex. That seems to be like the one that people go to straight away. But interestingly, as a guy who has a limb difference, you don't get anything. Whereas I'm a female with a limb difference, and I get the most like crazy DMs all the time asking me about fetishes, about men who want to put my arm in different places. And like, interestingly, as a guy, you don't get any of that. But yeah, as a woman, and I'm not the only person who gets this, because I know plenty of other limb difference women or femme presenting who also get the same. So it's a really, really interesting area for me to talk about, because I think there's a real difference between men and women when it comes to what people feel like they can and can't ask, or what they will and will not say to their faces surrounding disability.
Does it offend you, out of interest?
It really depends how it's said and what it's said. So if it's like a devotee, do you know what a devotee is? So a devotee is someone who essentially their kink is the fact that you're disabled, and that's what really gets them off. And it's quite like quite a problematic area of disability when we're talking about it, particularly surrounding like power struggles and men and women. It's a very, very bizarre like subsection of disability that is very, very rarely spoken about. But if I don't know you and you feel free to talk about my disability to my face and say something, you know, that is not necessarily correct, true, I don't know you, therefore I don't care. Quite frankly, I don't take advice off people I don't know, and I don't really listen to advice off people I don't know, and I don't really listen to comments off people I don't know. But if you're a friend of mine and you say something, then that's a problem. But my friends love me enough to be like, they wouldn't say anything, and not that there is anything to say, to be quite honest, because I like to think I'm quite an open book when it comes to disability. It's very much an open and closed case for me, and I'm aware that that's not everybody's experience, but for me it's very much like we can sit and we can chat about it, I don't have a problem, but I will let you know when you've gone too far.
Fair enough, yeah. That's interesting. I didn't think you was going there, and that's why I wasn't going to say anything. But no, I've had a few people make comments about... But that's me. That's me. I've jokingly said... I'm not sure if I should say this, but you can edit this bit out, and I might really offend people and whatever. But as a joke, I've said, I might set up a website for myself.
Do you know what? You probably get a lot of money for it. There's a lot of people out there who probably really enjoy that.
I don't know. I mean, but yeah, it's... So if I just ask quickly, because I know it's your... So there's no consciousness at all towards your limb difference then? No. There wouldn't be, would there? But there's nothing at all. Not a tiny element because you was born with it, I would assume.
No,
and I don't want to cross boundaries there.
No, not at all. I think I'm very, very open and upfront about my disability, but I've always been that way. I've never really like shied away from conversations, and I've always known that I was different. And that's fine. And I think, you know, you very, very quickly realize that absolutely everybody has something going on. And not that my disability was like my thing, but I always knew that I was different. And just because mine happened to be like a physical manifestation doesn't mean that somebody else's isn't physical. And so I've always been incredibly upfront and honest about who I am, because being a disabled child, I think you have to very quickly realize that if you aren't good with yourself, then other people aren't necessarily going to be good with you, because they don't know how to be, because disability is not something that we speak about at a young age, and it's not. And also when you're thinking about school and the scholastic system, teachers don't really know how to handle disabled kids. Don't care if you're a teacher or not. They really struggle, and that's, you know, been a really common experience for a lot of people I know. So you have to be good with yourself and be able to stand up for yourself when someone thinks that you're a health and safety hazard. And you have to be very sure in what you're asking for and your needs, and make sure that your needs are met, because if they aren't, there's going to be nobody else that's going to fight in your corner for you. And so I think that's probably like where I come from. And a lot of it is that well, I had to be the one person to trust my own back, and I'm quite happy with that, and it makes me just really open and honest about it.
That's really interesting because you've got, it sounds, well, you come across, you've got so much surety in yourself, which is amazing, and confidence, based on perhaps, well, it might be your background or as well, but based on your experience as a child, that you had to be this way and become this person, which I take my hat off to you for. Whereas someone like me, I feel like it's kind of gone the other way a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Surety has left me a little bit, and, you know, loving yourself has left me a little bit. But that's my issue. I know people that have lost limbs that are fantastic in themselves and they accept it. But yeah, that's really interesting. I'll just say very quickly, one person, I hope he doesn't watch this, but he's an old army friend. And I was on about, you know, I'm not getting into relationships and stuff, and it's not quite working. Mm-hmm. And he said to me, "Why don't you look for someone who's lost their arm?" And I was like, I can't remember how I responded, but I was like, I'm not gonna say much more on that. But that really kind of threw me off. I was like, what do you mean? What you're saying? Because I've lost an arm, that I can only try to look for a partner who's also lost a limb. I didn't say that because this is my problem. I don't like upsetting people, which is one of the things that we'll probably talk about. But I just found that bizarre that he would say it. The first time I was like, oh my God, I've never ever experienced any. I never thought I'd hear those words out of your mouth. It was actually on a WhatsApp message, but
it's really interesting though, because quite often something that a lot of people who aren't necessarily disabled don't realize is that just because two people are disabled doesn't mean they're automatically going to get on, because there are people in this world who are disabled and also assholes, and that is so fine, because there are people who are non-disabled and who are also assholes. But just because you're disabled doesn't automatically mean that you're going to get on with every other disabled person. And it's very, very interesting, because we like to club it together, because in our like, you know, like super caveman terms, putting a group of people all together who looked somewhat similar made sense.
Yeah, it was more aside, not as much as getting on, just more the fact that he felt that's I don't know, this, I've got to be careful because I'm disabled, but he was channeling me into one area, like you should only look for someone who's lost a limb. I was like, oh, really? Is that what you think? I don't know. Maybe I should wear my prosthetic more. No, I'm being silly. I've got a prosthetic. I don't wear it very often.
I stopped wearing prosthetics when I was 5, so like I'm the perfect person to talk to.
Yeah, it hurts me a little bit, so I don't tend to wear it. It doesn't. It's useless anyway. I know they're advancing, but it just sits there and does nothing. Even the ones that are a bit more advanced, they can't replicate what your hand can do. But anyway.
No, but then that's also a very interesting conversation to have, because I'm someone who doesn't like to wear prosthetics. Like, me and prosthetics don't necessarily get on. I just don't see why I have to wear something that's so incredibly false to, like, quote unquote fit into this society. Like, I'm a whole human just as I am. I don't need to add on something that doesn't exist for me to fit in. And so it's really interesting when we have conversations around prosthetics, because I know that they can be such a lifeline to so many people. So, like, I'm absolutely not dissing them. I think they do wonderful things for people. They just don't do wonderful things for me, and that is fine.
So I know you've got some questions, Brooke, and I don't want to take over with this, but just out of interest, if you don't mind me asking. So I wear one very rarely, but I went away to Brazil recently and I wore one because it was so crowded. And I don't like every person looking at my arm. So they do naturally. They don't mean anything by it. They're probably just, oh, that's out of the norm or whatever. You obviously would get the same. Do you pick up on people doing that? Because I do. I can see almost everyone that I pass pretty much. And again, that's maybe where I'm at, that I'm drawing that attention in. But I see them just kind of look and look again, and then I'll walk again and someone else will do it. And I become, it's ridiculous really, I'm 46 in March, but I become conscious of it. Do you see it for one, and are you just like, whatever, or don't even see it? Does it bother you in any way at all?
I mean, I definitely see it. I think this is the thing. A lot of disabled people will always notice when they're being stared at, and then you know when someone is staring at you for your disability. It's very, very obvious. But equally, at the same time, like, I have a life to lead, and I've got stuff that I need to do. And if you're staring, well, like, it probably says a bit more about you than it does about me. Like, I've got my own life that I need to get on with, and if I'm at the shop, then it's really not that interesting. The fact that I'm at a shop picking up my sushi, like, that's really fucking boring. But if you're staring, like, might as well look. You might learn something, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to necessarily converse with you. So yeah, I guess I do notice it, but does it affect me? Not really. Like, I think it is part and parcel of being disabled, I think. And it's not necessarily a nice part of being disabled. And I can completely understand why going from being non-disabled to disabled, that is, it does cause not great feelings. I can completely get that. But at the same time, like, you've got a life to lead, and like, if people are looking, you might as well give them something to stare at.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, some people prolong stares. It's unbelievable. But that, again, goes to the point that I think you was going to ask. So I don't want to jump in, but worrying what others think. Like, the moment you do that, like, life becomes a bit of the pain. And as I say, I'm 45, so I do allow too many people to concern me, which are complete strangers. So it's a really strange one, that is. But yeah, hey, that's where I'm at now today.
Yeah, it is interesting. With your journey to acceptance on disability, whereabouts would you say you are on that journey?
Acceptance of my own disability, did you say? I like percentages, but I'd like to think I'm halfway there. I mean, some people will listen to this, perhaps. I don't know if they'll come across it. Hopefully not. Some of the old soldiers that have lost limbs, and they're just getting on with their life, and they're thriving and striving. And I've gone a little bit backward, strangely. The first few years, I was great. I was doing all sorts of stuff, and yeah, it was amazing. And then I think since the pandemic, or slightly before that, I've started to just withdraw a little bit. I'm not sure the reason. I know this is getting quite deep, and I don't want it ever to come across as pitiful, but it's just my reality today. I'm probably only halfway there, because there's a part of me that is too conscious about it, and I'm worried what others think, which is bizarre. I'm not worried, I'm just conscious about it. And so if I go into a sauna or a swimming pool and things like that, I'm not entirely comfortable by it. Or I go to the gym, because I used to love training, and I still do. I'm just, if it's a new place, I'm conscious about other people, and it's crazy, really. But that's where I'm at. So I'd say I'm probably, physically, yes, I've got more surgery coming up, so that's fine. I can deal with that, not a problem. But psychologically with it, I'm probably only halfway there, really. There's still a way to go for me, which is quite strange, because I'm at the 13-year point this year. But that's the truth. That's my truth today.
I actually only have one final question for you, and I'm really intrigued to hear how you're going to answer this. And that is...
It's not about the fetish site, is it?
No, it's definitely not.
Don't you worry. Definitely cut that out.
Don't you worry. No, you can do what you want with that. No, that is, are you disabled and proud?
No.
Interesting.
I'm so sorry to say that. And I don't know how many listeners you get or stuff, but I'm sure there'll be people out there that think, oh my God, that guy's put me to sleep. He's put me on a... Only surround yourself with people with positive energy. I am a positive person. I just decided to say the truth, really, when we do this. And the truth is, I'm not really... I'm proud that I've come through what I've come through, because, it's horrendous, really. I was on life support and all sorts. So I'm proud of that. But am I proud today that I'm disabled? I'm going to have to say that I'm not. But I hope that in time, I become much more acceptant of my situation, because it's not going away. We're not going to grow a limb back. I'm so lucky that I'm alive. I'm supported in many ways. So I like to think that in time I'll be shouting from the rooftops, and I'll be well, not very happy. That might be stretching it a little bit, but I'll be a lot more at peace with the situation.
Mm-hmm.
But today, the answer really would have to swing towards, I'm not proud that I'm disabled. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think it's definitely your journey and your journey to acceptance with your disability. And if today you're not proud, then that's absolutely fine. And I think being disabled and proud definitely is a journey. It's not something that happens overnight. And I think, like you said, your journey to acceptance, as you said, you're really only 50% of the way there, which means you've got another 50% to go. And who knows how that's going to come along. But I think there's a lot of things that, when you look back on, actually being disabled probably makes you who you are today. And I think that that's really beautiful and wonderful. And I think there's so much grit and determination and disability that it will come. It will come. I'm sure it will.
Yeah. No, I think just talking to you and hearing your take on things and your perspective and how you've gone through many struggles to get where you are today, it's inspiring, and it sort of gives me a bit of a kick up the backside a little bit. It's like, come on, stop feeling sorry for yourself or whatever it may be. So no, I really appreciate that. I'll definitely take away a lot from the talk today.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to give us a chat. It's been a really interesting episode. I'm excited to hear what people think.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's been really good. Thank you very much.